Hey everyone, welcome to my top 15 games for the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis for those of you in America. Game number 15 is a game by Konami, who we'll actually be seeing a lot in this video. The first game I wanted to highlight was Tiny Toon Adventures, and this is an interesting pick because I've actually had this game in my collection for a good few years now, but it wasn't until a few months ago when Retro Gamer actually did an article all about the game here, and it got me thinking I should really try and play that. So I sat down the other day and played through most of the game, and I have to say I was very pleasantly surprised with what I actually saw in this game. I was expecting it to be a very simple mascot platformer, and it is, but it's a very fun one as well. The graphics and the animation in the game are just fantastic, and the controls are really nice and responsive too, and it took me back to some of my earlier memories of the Mega Drive as a kid, because Mega Drive games back then were a lot cheaper than Super Nintendo games, so I got a whole bunch of games not even knowing what they were like, and I would just put them in the console. Some of them I would play for a few minutes, some of them, like this one, I would play for a few hours and get really engrossed in, and this really brought me back to that time, so that is why Tiny Toon Adventures is number 15 on my list. Number 14 is a really interesting game that's probably best known as either a game that Sonic has a cameo in, or the Mega Drive's answer to The Legend of Zelda, but I think this game really stands apart on its own as one of the best action-adventure games on the system. It's called Soliel, also known in America as Crusader of Centy, and I actually got this for £9. You can see the price sticker right there from Lee's Games, one of my favourite game shops up in Morecambe that I always try and go to whenever I'm going on holiday over there. Anyway, this game is fantastic. I got this, as you can see, quite a while ago because it was only £9, and I remember, again, kind of like Tiny Toons, it took me a few years to actually get round to playing the game, but when I did, I was at uni and I played it downstairs in the living room in a shared accommodation, and I had some friends sit down and watch me play all the way through this game, and we all had a great time playing this and watching me get to the end of the game. And it's actually quite different to Zelda. Throughout your adventure you find different animals that you can make friends with, and then you can use their powers to solve different puzzles and to get through different sort of dungeons and environments, and it's really cool. So don't be put off the game if you think it's nothing more than a simple Zelda clone, because there really is a lot more to it, although unfortunately it's very expensive these days. Now I'm kind of cheating here because although this is one game technically, it is actually 3 games in one. I'm talking about Mega Games Volume 2 next, and this was actually a collection of 3 of the best games available on the Mega Drive at the time. So when I got my system, along with this game, I had hours and hours of entertainment from it. So it includes The Revenge of Shinobi, Streets of Rage 1, and also Golden Axe 1 as well. 3 fantastic side-scrollers. I especially enjoyed playing the original Golden Axe on here. I think that was my favourite of the 3, but that's not to say that the other 2 are bad games, although I think the sequels improved a lot over these 2 original games, but it's definitely worth getting this to get a good taste of what the Mega Drive's all about, and it was definitely something that hooked me on the system back then. Number 12 is a game by one of my all-time favourite game developers. They're called Treasure, and this game is Dynamite Heady. And what an interesting game it is too. Treasure's always known for really obscure and out there game ideas that they manage to somehow mould into something that makes perfect sense, and Dynamite Heady just encapsulates for me everything that the company is best at. It has such a wacky premise. Basically, you play as this character who can throw their head, kind of like how Rayman throws his fists, but you're throwing your entire head. But you can also upgrade your head, you can change it into different things, and you can sort of experiment with different types of heads that you attach onto your character in order to get through the levels. It's all very cartoony. It's actually sort of set in a stage, like a theatre production. The levels are great, the level designs are fantastic, the music and the graphics are just outstanding, and it's definitely one of my favourite games that Treasure ever made. Of course, they did go on to make some even better games though, and there is another one coming later in this list. And I would actually love to do a full video just about Treasure, the company, in the future as well, because I really think their games deserve all the attention that they can get, so you'll definitely be seeing more of Dynamite Heady soon. Now, number 11 was actually a toss-up between 2 games. I could either choose Phantasy Star 4 or Phantasy Star 2. I do have number 3 as well, but 3 was a little bit weird and it didn't really feel like a proper Phantasy Star game. And although I love 4, I think it's definitely the most polished of the bunch and probably the best RPG on the entire system, My pick actually goes to Phantasy Star 2, and this is probably mostly just for nostalgic reasons, and I didn't actually grow up playing this on the Mega Drive. The first time I actually experienced Phantasy Star 2 for myself was actually on the Wii Virtual Console, and I got completely addicted to the game. First of all, the music is just outstanding in this game, and it is a very difficult game as well. I don't think back then that I ever got like past the second dungeon or something, but I just kept replaying the game over and over and over again. Like every single day when I would come back from college, I would put the Wii on, I would load up Phantasy Star 2, and I would try and get just a little bit further in the game. These days, I would say play Phantasy Star 4 because this one is incredibly difficult to go back to. But back then, I really enjoyed it. I loved the aesthetic, I loved the characters in the game, I loved the world, and even though the dungeons were almost impossible to get through, I really enjoyed the challenge as well. So definitely check out Phantasy Star 2, although I would actually say the Master System Phantasy Star game is probably the easier one to go back to these days. Number 9 is a very special game for me. I'm a massive fan of the original Mega Man series, so I finally managed to get my hands on a copy of Mega Man: The Wily Wars. This is an incredibly hard to find game for the Mega Drive, and this isn't actually the original release. This is actually a special collector's edition that was made by RetroBreak, and I did actually do a full review on this if you want to see everything that it came with, as well as my thoughts and opinions about the game itself. I just loved the fact that they updated some of my all-time favourite games from the NES, and it's kind of like a Mario All-Stars style collection. There are a few issues with this that mean that it's not higher up on my list, but even so, all 3 of the original Mega Man games that are included in this are still fantastic games, even if you play them in this version. And I also loved the extra tower at the end of the game, where you can actually use all of the Robot Master's powers from across all 3 games. I love the new music that they included in this as well, and it's just a great package overall, and I'm so happy to have this special edition. And maybe one day in the far future I'll actually be able to afford the original. Now, I told you Konami would be back on this list soon, and here they are again. Unfortunately, I don't have the box for this one, but I do have it cart only, a very beaten up cart. Again, this is quite an expensive game. This is Castlevania. I think it's also known as Castlevania Bloodlines, or Castlevania the New Generation, depending on what region you're in, but all I can see on here is Castlevania, so that's what I'm going to call it. It's a very traditional Castlevania. It's a lot more simple than the Super Nintendo one that came out around the same time, but in some ways I prefer this. I really love the classic NES 8-bit Castlevania games, and this one is basically just an enhanced version of them with all new levels and graphics, and the music is incredible, as always with these kind of games, and the challenge is incredibly steep as well. But Konami really knew how to push the Mega Drive to its limits and make some of the best action-packed games on the system. I was actually playing Probotector or Contra, the Alien Wars I think it is as well, but because I don't actually physically own that one, I'm not going to be including it in this video, but you could interchange either of those in this spot, but I have to give it to Castlevania. Now, I told you that Treasure would be back, and they are back, but again, unfortunately, I don't actually own this one completely separately, so it's actually part of this classic collection here. The game in question is Gunstar Heroes, and this is probably my favourite game that Treasure has ever made. It's so over-the-top, non-stop action all the way through, and it's great fun in multiplayer as well. If you saw my Game Boy Advance Top 15 Games video, then you'll actually see that I also included the sequel in that one, but it is the original Gunstar Heroes that really cemented Treasure as one of my all-time favourite game developers. That and Mischief Makers at least, so definitely recommend Gunstar Heroes if you love run and gun shooting games and you want something completely over the top and something that really shows off everything that the Mega Drive can do. Now, next is a game by Sega, and unfortunately a game that never actually got a sequel, although I would love to see one. That is Ristar, or Ristar depending on how you pronounce it. It's a really cool game. In fact, I actually find myself going back to play this more than I actually go back to play some of the Sonic games. That is just how good this game is. It's kind of a slower paced platformer. Again, I would say it's actually more similar to something like Rayman than it is to Sonic, but that's definitely not a bad thing. I love how distinct all of the different levels are, and I love how unique the gameplay is as well, with basically everything revolving around you grabbing things, like grabbing stars, grabbing poles to swing yourself around, and it's just so fun to play. It is quite challenging though, and I've never actually managed to get all the way to the end of the game, but it's one that I always like to go back to and play over and over again. Now we're down to the top 5, and I've got 5 incredible games right here. First of all, we have Monster World 4. And again, this is a game that I originally played on the Wii, which actually featured a proper full English translation as well. It only actually came out in Japan, and I got this version in Japan when I first went there all the way back in 2014, and I was very excited to find it then. And it's a really nice piece for my collection. The game itself is kind of a very simple Metroidvania. It kind of mostly reminds me of something like the Shantae series, if you're not familiar with how the Monster World games play. They're kind of 2D side-scrolling action RPGs with different dungeons that you can visit and then towns to explore, and things that you can level up as well. It's a really great gameplay style, and this is definitely my favourite of the bunch when it comes to the original Monster World games. And of course, Sonic was bound to appear at some point in this video, but which one did I go for out of all the many Sonic games on the Mega Drive? I chose Sonic 2 as my absolute favourite Sonic game on the Mega Drive. It's the perfect 2D side-scrolling platformer in my opinion. Sonic 1 was a little bit slow in places and a little bit too difficult for child me, but Sonic 2 righted all the wrongs of the first game in my opinion, but it didn't balloon out of control like Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles did. At least that's what I thought back then. These days I'd probably actually go back to play Sonic & Knuckles more than I go back to play Sonic 2, but Sonic 2 will always have that nostalgic memory attached to it. This was the first Sonic game that I ever completed. It's the one that I've probably played the most out of any Sonic game, and it's probably the one for me personally with the most memorable levels and music as well. So really love Sonic 2, and I'm sure a lot of you watching do as well. But let me know down in the comments, what's your favourite Sonic game on the Mega Drive? I'd be really interested to know whether people share the same opinion as me or not. Now, the Mega Drive was full of fantastic shoot-em-ups, but my personal favourite of the bunch is definitely Thunder Force 3. And this is one of the only games that I've got that's actually the Genesis version instead of the Mega Drive version, and I was just blown away by this game when I first played it. The graphics were just insane, over the top, everything was so fast and so colourful, and for a shoot-em-up on the Mega Drive, it's actually fairly easy to get through as well, and I really appreciated that change of pace considering most of the games are just insanely difficult. I do actually have quite a few, and it was kind of difficult to decide which one to go for. But in the end, I think Thunder Force 3 is my favourite of the bunch. It's got the most memorable levels again, and I actually think it's a lot more action-packed than the fourth game in the series, which I've got right here, which a lot of people probably would say is the best game in the series, but I actually think Thunder Force 3 plays better. I like the fact that the levels are a bit more linear and also a bit more sort of action focused, where the levels in Thunder Force 4 are a little bit more open, but the whole game is kind of slower, and maybe it's a little bit more spectacle based rather than just pure shooting. So that's why I chose Thunder Force 3. Let me know down in the comments below which one of the two you prefer. Two left now, and these are actually two games in the same series, but I really couldn't choose one over the other, so I thought they both deserved a spot in the top 15. So number 14, or I guess number 2 if you want to think of it that way around, number 2 is Sparkster by Konami, and this is the sequel to obviously what's going to be number 1, which is Rocket Knight Adventures, but we'll get back to that in just a minute. Sparkster is a game that I have a very fond nostalgia for, so I didn't actually play it when it came out. In fact, I didn't even play Rocket Knight Adventures when it came out either. I got Rocket Knight Adventures randomly off my auntie and uncle back then. They found it at a boot sale, and they gave me this along with a bunch of other games, and I didn't think anything of it for ages. And then one day I popped Rocket Knight Adventures in, and it turned out to be one of my favourite games ever. So after a lot of time playing Rocket Knight Adventures and really loving that, I was just sitting around in college one day, not paying any attention to what I was supposed to be, and just browsing through game FAQs or something, and I found out that Rocket Knight Adventures had a sequel. Well, in fact, it has two sequels. There's one on the SNES as well. But I found out that there was a sequel on the Mega Drive, and I was so excited. And back then, we actually had a local game shop called Game Zone, which would actually check stock around the country and get it delivered to that store for you. So back then, I actually asked in my local Game Zone in Shrewsbury whether they could track down a copy of Sparkster for me. And he said yes, he had one in stock, and he got it in. And a week later, I went over and I bought it for £20. And I wonder whether my original receipt is here. It is actually. Oh my god. There it is. Sparkster, £20. 26 middle level Darwin Shopping Centre, Game Zone. And it was the 16th of October 2008. So I love the fact that I've kept the receipt for that as well, because when I got home after college that day and I put in this game that I'd been so excited about. In fact, before I even got the game, I'd actually watched a few Let's Plays online. And this was around the time when I was just starting to actually build up my own YouTube channel. And I remember back then there was a channel called Silent Bun, and I know he still watches, so if you're watching this one, Silent Bun, thank you so much for your Let's Play back then, because that is what actually got me interested in the game in the first place. So I got home, I put it in, I kind of already knew what to expect because I've watched Silent Bun's Let's Play like 10 times at that point, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. Sure, it's not the best platformer on the system, it's probably not even in the top 10 if you want to look at it objectively, because there are a few things that really frustrate me about this game. There's a lot of areas in the game where you're just forced to stop until you've killed a certain number of enemies or until something's happened. Like, there's a really frustrating bit in the first level where you have to wait for this big cylinder to spin round and then you can undo these bolts. But apart from those little annoyances, I really love the game. The music is outstanding. I love the gameplay tweaks that they did to this game as well. It feels quite different to the first one in a good way. I actually really like what they did with this one. And the music is incredible, the graphics look fantastic as well, and is just one of my favourite games to go back to and play over and over again. But my favourite game on the Mega Drive, and one of my favourite platformers of all time, is the original Rocket Knight Adventures, and I kind of covered how I actually found out about this game in the first place, but when I actually sat down and played it, I was just completely blown away with how much better this game was than I had any idea that it was going to be. I literally sat down and played it for about 5 hours straight that night, and I actually completed it. And then the next day I actually got on YouTube and actually filmed a Let's Play when, you know, I didn't really have a proper camera, I didn't have any capture equipment, so it was literally just me angling my laptop up to point it at the TV that was on the wall, and I recorded my gameplay of this game. That's just how much I loved it when I first found out about it. And it definitely deserves the #1 spot on this list of best Mega Drive games. Obviously, these are just my personal picks, and the picks of the games that I actually own physically. There's a load of great games that are kind of expensive, so maybe when I've actually collected more in the future I'll do a follow-up. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below what your favourite games are for the Mega Drive or the Genesis. And if you want to see more top games, then check out the video up here and watch the video that I did this time last year for the Super Nintendo. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.